Good afternoon. I'm Kathleen O'Sullivan-Fortin. I'm a member of the Board of Directors for ALD Connect. And thank you all for coming to our webinar describing the upcoming externally led patient-focused drug development meeting with the FDA. Before we kick off this meeting, I'd like to introduce you to some faces that you may not be familiar with. I'd like to welcome James Valentine and Larry Bauer from Hyman, Phelps and McNamara, who I've gotten to know over the past several months as they've been helping us plan this meeting. James has worked the last 13 years as a champion for the patient voice as part of the regulatory process. And James has previously worked at the FDA where he was a patient liaison, helping to incorporate the patient voice into medical product review acts across the FDA's various medical product centers and review divisions. There, he helped to develop and launch the Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative, and this meeting is part of that process. Larry worked at the NIH for 17 years in clinical research, followed by a position at the FDA as a regulatory scientist in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research's Rare Diseases Program, a group he co-founded and worked for 10 years, where he advanced rare disease drug development. In private practice, James and Larry have worked with many patient organizations to ensure their community's voices were heard by decision makers. Relevant to our ELPFDD meeting, they have been involved in helping plan and moderate 3/4 of over 50 externally led PFDD meetings. So we're in good hands with Larry and James. So I just wanted to introduce all the players that you're going to be speaking with today. And really, the focus of our meeting is going to be the adult manifestations of adrenoleukodystrophy. So that means men with AMN, symptomatic women with ALD, and adults, usually men, with cerebral ALD. So I just want to really officially welcome you on behalf of ALD Connect, on behalf of myself as a fellow ALD patient. This is a really exciting initiative to inform the FDA about the patient perspectives and all of the unmet need for adults living with ALD. This is our opportunity to make our voice heard. This is your one-time opportunity to share your story of adults living with ALD to the FDA. It doesn't matter where you live, where you are in this journey, where you come to this community. What matters is your story. So I really want to continue to hammer home this point. If you get nothing else from this webinar, that this is our chance to rewrite the books, the book that they use to review ALD products and their potential therapeutics, and to really allow them to know what we go through, how ALD and AMN have changed our lives, and where we need the most help. I will also note that it's important for patients and for caregivers. All of this is thanks to our sponsors. We obviously have expert help to shepherd us through this process, and there's also some other technical expenses that come as part of this process. And without our sponsors, Audubon Therapeutics, Minarex Therapeutics, Swan Biotherapeutics, and hopefully some others that will want to join us, it's really says a lot about the amount of industry support we have, that they support us as a community and that they trust us to tell FDA about our own disease and conditions and experiences. A little webinar housekeeping. Today's webinar will last about an hour. Everyone will be muted, which will allow our panel to present. You'll be able to use the Q&A box, and at the end of the presentations, we'll be addressing those issues and concerns. Also, this webinar is going to be recorded. As you noted when it said, "Are you okay with joining?" It's being recorded, and it will be available on YouTube. It will be available and linked through our website. So use as a resource to share with family or friends in the community who might be interested in learning more about this process. And with that, I will turn it over.
Thank you so much. And this is James Valentine, and you'll be hearing from my colleague Larry Bauer also as part of this discussion today. And as Kathleen so nicely set up, this is really, about this upcoming opportunity that you're going to have to engage with FDA in a real live dialogue about what it is to live with ALD, and have that input, and know that that input is going to help inform how drugs are developed and tested, and help inform how FDA considers the data that's generated from trials in evaluating those new drugs when they make approval decisions. And so that is a bit of what our focus is today. But before we get into any of those specifics, I just want to talk to you a little bit about this meeting, because you may be wondering, what is patient-focused drug development? Am I in the right place attending this webinar? So we want to give you a little bit of context about that. And so this upcoming externally led patient-focused drug development meeting is really a meeting geared to help educate the Food and Drug Administration, as well as other important stakeholders like those companies that are developing drugs for ALD. So that way they have a better understanding of what it is like to live with ALD, how ALD impacts your daily life, what that looks like, what those most significant burdens are, how you're currently managing the symptoms and health effects of ALD, and importantly, your perspectives about what your priorities and what represents a meaningful treatment for your ALD. All of this together, and you'll be hearing more about this in our presentation, are key items that help inform, how we think about what should be measured in trials, how we actually assess and weigh benefits of a drug against the risks. So you might be wondering, why should you participate? Well, this is a very unique opportunity. FDA and those other stakeholders are essentially taking a full day out of their very busy schedules to take a deep dive with us into understanding what ALD is and how patients experience it, and what your priorities are for treatments. And so this is obviously really important, because FDA, they have the responsibility to approve all treatments for ALD in the United States. And so it is really important that they know what is most important to you all, the patients and caregivers of those living with ALD. And as I've alluded to, this is going to directly inform their decision-making, which can only help to lead to better treatments and potentially faster approvals for ALD treatments. Why is this now? ALD, wasn't, discovered yesterday. So, why is it that, in 2022, we're talking about having this PFDD meeting? Couldn't we have maybe accelerated drug development, sooner if we had this meeting, many years ago? Well, this type of opportunity and process hasn't existed forever. In fact, if we look back historically, the patient voice had been absent from the drug development process. It wasn't until late in drug development, when a drug was approved or was being considered for approval, that we realized that we didn't study things that were really important to patients. So we didn't know if drugs actually helped those things in patients' lives that they wanted help with the most. Or even worse, if a clinical trial failed to show that a drug worked, it was a question of, a lot of the times, why? Was it really that the drug didn't work, or were we measuring the wrong things? Or were we measuring the right things, but in the wrong way, to actually be able to determine if there was a treatment benefit? And if we just listened to patients and understood their disease experience, that can help us design those studies to avoid those types of interpretation issues. So FDA recognized that this was a problem. There wasn't a process. And so now patient engagement is a priority for the agency. And we've been creating tools. When Larry and I were both at FDA, we were involved in helping create these tools to bring in the patient voice earlier and throughout the drug development process. And so now this patient-focused drug development meeting that we're going to be talking about today is a really important tool for helping us do that. And so what's so key, and I'll echo Kathleen's, if you take away one thing from this webinar, it's that this, showing up and participating in that meeting is going to be so critical, because we need to hear from as many voices as possible and hearing from all of you and painting this picture of ALD and treatment priorities for ALD, is going to have, a huge impact both in the near term and as we hopefully a whole, robust pipeline of drugs, that are being developed for ALD kind of come into existence. So with some of that is just kind of a little bit of a taste of what this PFD is all about. Here's the meat of our discussion for today. I'll be walking us through a little bit of background on the FDA and drug development. We know some of you may have more or less of understanding of what FDA does, how drugs actually are developed, and what role FDA plays in that process. And so we want to make sure that everybody has kind of that same understanding, because then when I pass it off to Larry and he talks to us about patient-focused drug development and why the patient voice is important, you'll be able to kind of see how your input is going to feed in to that process that I'll have described. But in addition to kind of giving you that important background, we'll also be talking specifically about our meeting, what you can expect in terms of how the meeting will be, what the agenda will look like, the different ways you'll be able to participate, how you can make sure you're signed up, and some opportunities that we have right now to potentially be a speaker in the meeting. So we're going to be talking about a lot of important information throughout, and we'll save time at the end to make sure we answer some Q&A with all of you. So throughout, anytime you have a question that comes to mind, enter it in that Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll circle back at the end and try to answer as many questions as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to take us into understanding FDA and drug development. And in understanding drug development, I'm going to, at a very high level, walk us through the process through which drugs actually get developed, so you can see how the sausage is made in terms of having that drug eventually get to the market, so that way your doctor can prescribe it to you. Well, this really starts in the earlier of stages in what's called drug discovery. And this is really, when we talk about like NIH and academic institutions and basic science research, we're looking for ways to understand the disease process, because if we understand the disease process, it gives us opportunities to try to intervene through drugs or biological products to try to, halt or reverse or have some other impact on that disease process. And once we do understand, where we might be able to intervene, we can then start screening products, things that, we know about, or maybe different platforms that we can customize to try to, have a certain effect in a disease. And so it's through this process of discovering those compounds that we, look for that thing that hopefully has, some kind of lock and key mechanism to try to impact, whether it's the root cause of a condition or maybe downstream, it helps alleviate, a particular set or individual symptom or health effect, maybe even if it can't, maybe intervene and improve all of the symptoms or health effects. Once we've identified that potential drug, we've discovered that candidate drug, we start testing. But the first type of testing that we do happens in the what we call preclinical environment. So preclinical meaning before the clinic, just means before we actually test in humans. So that preclinical work, is being done in animal studies, in other kind of, we can kind of call them petri dish type studies, where we're done in the laboratory. We can primarily, we're looking to see if the drug is going to be safe. That's through toxicology studies that we do in animals. That way we can identify what dose will be safe in humans. But we're also, looking at this stage to, if we have some animal models or other, laboratory models of the disease, to see if maybe there's some target engagement, whether, the drug is doing what we think it should do in order to help impact the disease process. And so that work done in the non-clinical stage, when we feel like when we've done the right testing, adequate testing to show that we can pick a safe dose to go into humans. And, we have some, early signals that the drug may work in doing what we think it does. Then we get to what this, at the end of preclinical development, and we're thinking about what's called an investigational new drug application, or IND. That IND is an application that a researcher or drug developer can make to the FDA that allows it to go into its first study in humans. And so that IND submission to FDA includes all of those those preclinical studies, those animal studies. It also includes manufacturing information. It's really important to make sure that investigational treatments that are being used in trials are made in a high quality way. We want to make sure that we know what patients are getting, both in terms of the active drug. We want to make sure that from one batch to the next, it's you're getting the same amount. We also want to try to make sure we can avoid any impurities that could be harmful. So manufacturing is something that we maybe don't always talk about as much, but is always going on behind the scenes and is really important. This IND also includes the protocol, which is the clinical study plan for a clinical trial, as well as investigator information that will help inform, teach investigators which are the doctors that are running the clinical trials, about the drug, how it works, what the non-clinical information is. Once FDA, they have 30 days to review that. Once if they agree that it's safe to proceed into clinical trials, we typically go first into what is called a phase 1 clinical trial. This is the smallest and shortest type of clinical trial that we do. We're really focused on drug safety. We have never tested maybe this drug in humans before. And so we want to see, what are the most common side effects and how serious are those really common side effects. At the same time, we can, look at blood levels. We can do other types of monitoring to see if the drug's getting into the parts of the body that it needs to get to, how long it stays there, how it leaves the body. And that helps us understand, if we have the right dose that we need to kind of get to the areas where maybe we can see some early signs of activity. But again, primarily, this is a study designed to look at drug safety. So these phase 1 studies sometimes are in healthy volunteers, so people not with a particular disease or condition. Other times we might actually do that phase 1 study in patients with the actual condition that we're going to be ultimately investigating the product in. Once we've done those phase 1 clinical trials, then we can submit a new protocol to FDA to move into phase 2 clinical trials. These trials are, unlike phase 1, which are usually just a month or so. These are now the first time we're dosing for longer periods of time, and we increase the number of people that we're actually evaluating the drug in. This allows us to start to look at the drug's effectiveness, which is how the drug works in treating the disease, the actual drug benefits. And so, we're all, at this point, because we are looking at effectiveness, we're trying to compare that to see if that's better or worse than what would happen in a patient that isn't treated. And so we often give placebo. You can think of this as like the sugar pill. A lot of you will have heard of the placebo effect. Patients who think that they're getting a drug tend to feel better, do better in some ways. And so we want to make sure that the drug effect is really due to the drug and not due to that placebo effect. And so placebo is just one type of control that we can have. There are others. That's just the one probably most of you will have heard of. And again, we're always throughout drug development worried about safety. So we're now able to start to look at more of these short-term side effects, as we slowly start now having more and more people exposed to the drug. And as we're treating them for longer periods of time, it gives us an opportunity to start to see things that are a little rarer or maybe take a little bit longer to show up. That way we can continuously make sure that we're not moving and advancing a drug that is unsafe relative to the benefit it's providing. Once we have completed phase 2, we get to the third and final phase of clinical trials, which are called phase 3 trials. These are the ones that sometimes are referred to as pivotal clinical trials. These are the ones that are establishing drug effectiveness and safety. And that's because they're larger, we can design them in ways that allow us to best analyze the differences between, a drug's benefits and risks compared to those controls, often placebo controls. It also allows us to then randomize. That helps eliminate certain bias that could be involved. And as we're getting now larger numbers of participants, we're also able to have more of an ability to detect different changes because we have more what's called power. And so, we're looking now here to make sure we have those endpoints in clinical trials that help us measure what is, are those treatment benefits. This is really important that we make sure we're measuring endpoints that matter to patients. You can get a drug maybe approved on something that doesn't matter to patients, but what good is that going to do if we don't really, that doesn't translate to you and help you make a treatment decision with your, healthcare provider, to kind of help, decide is this the right treatment for you. We're looking now at longer durations and for chronic treatments, so things that are, intended not just to, treat something, it resolves and then you stop the drug, but you're really taking a treatment, chronically because you're treating a chronic disease like ALD. You're going to be going out for longer durations of time, many months or even up to a year or over a year. To see, how that drug effect, if it's durable, how it changes over time. And now again, because we've got a lot more people taking it for much longer periods of time, we continue to do that safety evaluation. We're usually the usual FDA requirement is that you have 2 of these phase 3 trials, although often in rare diseases, because there's limited numbers of people to recruit into trials. A lot of times diseases like ALD are very serious, and there's really great unmet medical needs because there's not FDA approved drugs. FDA is willing to accept a single phase 3 trial to inform an approval decision. There's certain additional circumstances, we won't talk about that, of other information they usually want to see with that phase 3 trial, but it's less than needing to do 2 of those phase 3 trials. And that allows these drugs to get, if they do demonstrate safety and effectiveness, get to patients sooner, because even if it's a 1-year clinical trial, if you think about the time it takes to design it, get the study sites, at the different healthcare settings set up, actually then recruit and then run the 1-year trial, read out data, analyze it, et cetera, et cetera. We're talking about actually many years to do even just a 1-year clinical trial. And we know how precious every day is. So once clinical development concludes, we then are looking at or drug developers are looking to submit what's called a new drug application. And that's for small molecule drugs, traditional drugs, or a biologics license application, or BLA, which is what we would use for biological products like cell or gene therapies or vaccines. And that marketing application contains all of the information that was collected, both the preclinical information as well as all of that clinical trial information. And so, the goal is for FDA to be able to review that to determine what the benefits of a drug are, what the risks of a drug are, and whether the benefits outweigh the risks. But rather than just go ahead and submit that application to FDA, drug companies first will meet with FDA in a pre-NDA meeting or pre-BLA meeting and identify all of that information they intend to submit and share the data from those phase 3 pivotal studies. And this gives FDA and the drug company opportunity to discuss whether they agree if there's enough information currently. And if not, what else might need to be done whether it's another clinical trial or just more additional analyses or something else, that would allow that NDA or BLA to really be a complete application. So once we get to that point, and we're actually have a NDA or BLA with FDA, they're now again evaluating the benefits of the drug, the risks of the drug, and also remember that third part, the quality, the manufacturing quality of the drug. Those are kind of the three prongs of what FDA is looking at. Before they start digging into those things, they're going to first look to double check and make sure the application's complete. If they agree, then FDA then files the application, and then that's when a review team really fully starts to investigate or review all of that data. Again, what is the drug's benefit? How confident are we in what those benefits are? What is the safety profile? Do we have confidence that we studied enough people for the right amounts of time to have identified the key safety issues? Is the manufacturing method and the controls that are used in the manufacturing process sufficient to ensure that the product is high quality? That's what FDA is looking at. Sometimes FDA says that this isn't a clear-cut case. It's not one that we for sure should approve or we for sure should not approve. So we're going to take that to what's called an advisory committee. And so you may have heard about in the news or other ways about advisory committee meetings. These are panels of external experts, people that don't work at the FDA. They might be clinicians, they might be biostatisticians. There are patient representatives that actually sit on and vote as part of the committee, and they weigh in and help give FDA input. Ultimately, though, they are only advisory. FDA still is the one responsible to make the ultimate decision. Assuming a drug does get approved, then the job of the drug life cycle doesn't end there. We're going to be looking, once a drug's approved, to continue to try to analyze the safety. As you can imagine, in clinical trials, even the bigger phase 3 trials, it's still a fairly limited number of people that have tried the drug. When it's out on the market, many, many more people are going to be taking it. And many people who have maybe comorbidities or are slightly different ages or not exactly the same population that were in those clinical trials. And so because of that, we want to understand in the real world, when many, many more people are taking it, what the drug safety issues are that arise. And so those are cataloged and reviewed, so that way we can kind of continuously make sure that at no point even though at the time of approval, FDA thought the benefits outweigh the risks, that didn't flip-flop, and now the risks are outweighing the benefits. So I've talked a lot about the process. I'll very quickly talk about FDA's role in that. One thing that's really important to know is that FDA is not the one that's developing those drugs. It is researchers, pharmaceutical companies, sometimes even nonprofit groups are the ones taking those drugs and advancing them through development. So FDA is not the ones that are actually testing the drugs in trials. It's those researchers and drug companies that are sponsoring those clinical trials. That also means that FDA staff, they're not on site during trials. All they're doing is kind of reviewing the proposals, the research plans, and giving feedback on it and approval before they begin, but they're not the ones that actually are responsible for doing it. They can't make a drug company do a particular study. All they can do is allow studies that are proposed to them. They can give input on it, and they can say, they can put a study on what's called a clinical hold if they don't think that it's a safe study for patients. Some other things about FDA's role in all of this. Once a drug is approved, FDA does not have the authority to regulate the practice of medicine. So what the doctors and other prescribers can actually do. So you may have heard of off-label use, using a drug, off the FDA approved label is what that means. And so FDA, they're only regulating what the company who makes the drug can say and market about the drug, but they can't tell a doctor that they can't use it for off-label purposes. So that's important to note. Also, another thing that is probably top of mind for a lot of us is the price of medicines and whether insurance companies will cover them, even the government. government insurers. But this is not within FDA's mandate. They can't consider the price of drugs when they're making their approval decisions. They don't have access to that information. But even if they did, they're not allowed to incorporate that. That's not part of what the law says that they can consider. So again, if there's issues with access or cost and pricing, those are things that are outside of FDA's purview. All that being said, I said a lot of what FDA doesn't do, but they do have a role in helping facilitate drug development. They see so many drug programs. They know things that work well. They know pitfalls, traps in drug development. And that's why those meetings between drug companies and FDA are so important, so they can share all of the knowledge that they have, much of which is not public knowledge, to help companies design their studies and help advance these programs through development. And so if you're interested in this, this was just a kind of, the Cliff Notes version of how drugs are developed and FDA's role. But FDA's website has a area designed for patient stakeholders like all of you. If you want to learn more about FDA and what it does, you can go to this website here on the slide, fda.gov/for-patients, and check that out. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Larry Bauer, who's now going to talk about where the patient voice fits into all of that, including through this PFDD meeting.
Thanks so much, James. It was a great overview of the FDA process. It is fairly complicated, but most drugs go step by step through those different phases of development, just like James laid out. And thanks to Kathleen earlier for the kind introduction. So now we're gonna shift gears a little bit from general drug development to looking at this meeting that's coming up on July 22nd. Next. So, what is the purpose of this meeting? The FDA wanted a more systematic way to gather the patient perspective about, different diseases and what were the available treatment options for those diseases. It helps inform their understanding of the context for benefit risk assessment and decision-making for new drugs. And we'll go into this benefit risk assessment in a little more depth in just a second. And hearing from patients and their caregivers, this kind of input really helps the FDA during drug development, as well as during the review of an application for, when it's time to consider marketing a new drug. Next slide. So this is, when the FDA gets an application from a drug company that they've developed a new drug, they've completed their studies, the FDA has to review all of the information and then make a decision. It's either thumbs up or thumbs down, basically. Are we going to let this drug move forward and let it be, available at pharmacies, or is there still going to, is more research needed or something else needed before, they could make it available? So they have to evaluate, as part of their assessment, what are the benefits of this drug? What does this drug do to help in the disease process? How big are those benefits? And then on the other hand, what are the risks of the drug? So what are the potential side effects? And if there are side effects, is there something you can do about it? For instance, if a drug caused headache, if you can take ibuprofen and that cures the headache, okay, so that's not so big a risk. If it causes, your red blood cell count to bottom out, that's maybe a bigger issue. And so they have to take that into different consideration. So they have to analyze the condition, like what is the disease, and look at the current treatment options so that they can understand what is the context for this benefit risk decision. That's a big part. Those first two bullets are a big part of why we're having this meeting. This meeting is going to provide them the information about the analysis of the condition and what's the current landscape for treating ALD. And then the other part is to look at the benefits. So, they want to review the clinical studies to see what benefits showed up in the study and what risks showed up in the study. And then, as I mentioned, risk management. How can we manage anything that does seem to come up? Next slide. So in order to do this, we are going to have this ALD Voice of the Patient meeting. It's a framework for discussing questions, as I just said, about the FDA's benefit risk framework, and it represents important considerations in their decision making. So we reviewed this and other disease area questions, and we've tailored our meeting that we're planning to communicate the most important information related to ALD. And the FDA, we meet on a regular basis to plan this meeting. We're meeting once a month with them to talk about it. And they've emphasized to us again and again that active patient involvement and participation is going to be the key to the success of these meetings. And we're so heartened to see so many of you that have called in to be part of this planning meeting today, this webinar. And we hope that all of you join us on the 22nd. Next slide. At the end of the meeting, you say, well, what's the outcome of this meeting? So we're going to write up a big summary of the meeting called the Voice of the Patient Report. This will give, it'll be a summary of everything that happened on July 22nd. We will summarize the caregiver and patient testimonies. We're going to do some live polling. We'll summarize what we learned through polling and through written and comments, as well as people calling in with comments. This Voice of the Patient report is going to be a key communication to FDA review staff, as well as to regulated industry, about what patients and their caregivers most want to see in a new treatment. And FDA really wants this information because it informs them about ways to develop meaningful treatments for ALD. Next slide. So this is, let's go into a little more depth about how you personally can participate in the meeting. So the meeting is for ALD patients and caregivers. There will be FDA staff in attendance, although you'll never see them or hear from them. They'll be in the background watching. We will have pharma companies watching and biotech companies and anyone interested in learning. This meeting is open to the public. It'll take place on July 22nd from 10 a.m. to 3:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the meeting's going to be virtual. You know, this is kind of the reality of life with COVID. We don't know where we'll be in July, so we've decided to just have the meeting virtual. It's also a good way for people to be able to join from all over the country and all over the world. I noticed in the chat box that we have Vijay here from India. Namaste, Vijay. And we have Carla from Bolivia. Hola, Carla. So, you know, we've got people already participating from all over. And this will be an interactive live stream meeting. Next slide. So just to go over, what is the agenda going to look like on the 22nd? We'll start by having some a welcome and some introductory comments from the meeting co-moderator, as well as a representative from the FDA. Then we've invited a clinical expert who's going to give background on ALD and talk about a little bit about clinical trials. The reason we invited a clinical expert was just to give a brief 15-minute overview of ALD so that everybody kind of has a scientific understanding of ALD as a you know, a basis for the rest of the day when we hear from all of you. Then the rest of the day is broken into two main topics. The first topic, well, you know, this is in the later part of the morning. We will talk about how ALD symptoms affect your life, you know, and then in the afternoon, you know, we'll take a break for lunch, half-hour break, and then we'll come back in the afternoon and talk about how you manage symptoms and what you would like to see in current and future approaches to treatment. The topics will include pre-recorded patient panels and will include polling questions and a moderated discussion with the audience. And then we'll have a summary of the day and some closing comments. Next, please. So what are I'm going to go into a little bit more about the discussion questions that we'll have on the day of the meeting. So in that morning session, Living with ALD, we're going to ask things like, of all the symptoms of ALD, which 1 to 3 symptoms have had the most significant impact on your life? How does ALD affect you on your best and on your worst days? And can you describe to us your best days and your worst days? And maybe are there specific activities that are important to you that you cannot do at all or as fully as you would like because of ALD? Next. We also ask, how have your symptoms changed over time? How has your ability to cope with the symptoms changed over time? So has the disease progressed? Has it been stable? And what do you fear the most as you get older? What worries you the most about living with ALD, and what frustrates you most about your condition? Next slide. Then in the afternoon session, when we're talking about current challenges to treating ALD, some of the things that we will ask and talk about are, what are you currently doing to manage your ALD symptoms? This can include both medications as well as non-medical interventions, such as maybe some people are using meditation or using things that are over the counter, like certain vitamins or supplements. And then we want to know, how well do these treatments treat the most significant symptoms of your ALD? Are they effective? Are some of them partially effective? And what are the most significant downsides to your current treatments, and how do they affect your daily life? And finally, we'd like to say, short of a complete cure, which we know everybody would just love to see a cure for ALD, but short of that complete cure, what specific things would you look for in an ideal new treatment for ALD? Next slide. So the discussion format, there will be, at the beginning of each session, we'll have a panel of pre-recorded patient statements on each topic. The purpose of these pre-recorded panelist statements is to set the foundation for the following broader audience discussion. We'll have 5 panelists for the morning and 5 for the afternoon, and they'll be selected to reflect a range of experiences with ALD. And then patients in the audience and online will have a chance to answer polling questions. These will be on the screen, but you will also be able to participate in the polling on your cell phone or a tablet or a laptop. The purpose of these polling questions is to be a starting off point for discussion. And after we do some polling questions, we'll move into a moderated discussion with the patients in the audience. The purpose of this is to build on the experiences that were shared by the panel. And the moderator for the meeting, who's going to be James, will ask questions and invite you, all of you, to submit responses in writing, or preferably, we would like you to call in to provide live comments on the day of the meeting. We will also have a few pre-selected people that will be discussion starters that will be live on a Zoom call on the day of the meeting. Next. So a couple tips on how to participate effectively on July 22nd. Please remember FDA's role and the purpose of the meeting. James talked about, what the FDA does and what they don't do. Maybe review these discussion questions in advance. And if you have something important to share, relate it to the most appropriate topic or panel question, and please call in. And it's okay to reiterate a feeling or experience that somebody else already voiced. Maybe it's similar to your own, but when you call in and talk about it, give it a personal or a unique perspective and, about how this symptom or a treatment has affected your life. We want to hear from as many people as possible, so please keep your comments concise and focused. And you can always send in additional comments after the meeting. So after the meeting is finished, we will have a website where you can submit additional comments that, as ideas come to you, things you'd like to share for about 30 days after the meeting. Next slide. So you can participate in the meeting by tuning into the webcast. Your responses will be kept confidential. We'll just use people's first names only. We're going to register for the meeting. There'll be a registration link open soon on the ALD Connect website. As I said, you can submit comments for 30 days after the meeting. And all of these comments, the ones that we get on the day of the meeting, as well as the ones that come in later, we will try to include all of them into the Voice of the Patient report, which will be eventually submitted to the FDA. We also ask that you respond to a pre-meeting survey. Taking this survey, you can nominate yourself to be one of the potential speakers, like one of those panelists that we talked about, or one of the Zoom discussion starters. You can access this survey on the ALD Connect homepage. And the meeting registration link will be sent to all survey respondents once the registration link is live. Next. So in summary, This upcoming meeting really is your opportunity to be part of the process and to have a meaningful impact on clinical trial design and drug development, because your collective voices must be heard at the beginning of the drug development process to help companies when they're designing trials so that those trials better meet your needs, and also to help the FDA assess the risks and benefits of new drugs with a full understanding of the impact of ALD and the patient perspective. So please, please join us and help make a difference. So we look forward to your participation on July 22nd. We hope that this webinar has kind of whet your interest in being part of this. If you have questions, we're going to have a Q&A session right now, but if after the webinar is finished, if you have additional questions, Kathleen has been very generous in offering us her personal, her work email, and you can send those questions to her. So thank you all so much for your attention. I know we threw a lot of information at you in a short time, and now we're going to spend a few minutes trying to answer questions and clarify anything that might be on people's minds.
Yes, so just as a reminder, please use that Q&A box to send any questions that you have. We're looking there for questions. Of course, I continue to interact with one another in the chat box, but for questions, we're looking into that Q&A box. I've noticed that a number of questions have come in about particular drugs and particular drug development programs. And while that's out of scope for what we're talking about today, to kind of give updates on what is happening with any particular drug or drug development program, I did think it was important and relevant for this PFDD meeting to know that this is a meeting that is going to help all drug programs, that this input is going to help both for those programs that have yet to even start clinical trials, as well as those that are already in clinical trials, and maybe FDA is going to be interpreting or evaluating data from those studies. They'll be able to, as Larry described, help understand the conditions so they can evaluate those benefits against those risks. But for those where clinical trials are still being designed, I saw that there was another question about someone who had actually participated in a trial and maybe felt that some of the things being captured in that trial, weren't the things that maybe, really represent what's most important to him. And so this meeting, in the way that it's designed, all of those types of discussion questions and other activities that Larry discussed are actually going to help inform, what should be the things that we're measuring in trials. If FDA hears from you, those symptoms and health effects that are most troublesome, having the greatest impacts in your daily life, they hear from you your top treatment goals short of that cure for ALD. What are you looking for in an ideal future treatment? That helps serve as a framework for them to then, look to see, are these things that we can measure? Are we measuring them? Of course, a drug has to have the potential to affect that particular aspect of the disease, but assuming it does, the mechanism, could have an effect there. Then we're essentially laying out a roadmap for what those potential outcome measures can be, and whether that's developing new ones, repurposing some, or maybe endorsing some that already exist. That all of that is kind of on the table and is directly going to be an output of what Larry discussed. So we encourage people who have been in clinical trials to participate. In fact, when Larry talked about sharing your experiences with treatments, we know in rare diseases like ALD, a lot of the time clinical trial treatments are your standard of care, because you have a high unmet need. And so you go to clinical trials to find additional options. And so we want to hear about your trial experiences, both, things that have helped you and what that's looked like and translated to, also the downsides, of treatments and trial participation. So that is also within the scope of this meeting.
Yeah, and then I saw a question from Nancy. Oh, go ahead, James. Did you have more on yours?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and Nancy's asked if it would help if any state senators are available. As I mentioned, and James has mentioned, this is a public meeting, so you guys can invite your family, your friends, your physician, and if you know senators and people that are making laws and regulations and policy related to rare disease drug development, if they would like to attend, that would be great. We welcome their attendance and they can learn as well. So please know that this is open to anyone that you would like to invite to participate.
Yeah, and along those same lines, Connie had asked, do we want to include caregivers of those with ALD who have passed away? And so I'd like to throw this to Kathleen to talk about, who all we want to hear from in this community.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. This has been so enlightening. And I apologize if I look slightly distracted because I've been trying to answer some of the questions online. For sure, we want to be hearing from the whole spectrum of patients and families affected by adult manifestations of ALD. So that means women with ALD and their caregivers, men with AMN and their caregivers, and unfortunately, folks who have gone through cerebral ALD and the family members and loved ones and caregivers of those we have lost to this monster of a disease. No one can tell that story better than those caregivers, unfortunately, after a certain point. And so that's a very important voice. I'm hoping people will fill out the survey and kind of take an opportunity to step forward, raise your hand, say you're interested in being involved. And from that, because I'm addressing also pulling in another question that I answered online, that we will be selecting with our amazing, FDA Sherpas here, Larry and James, that are going to take us to the top of this mountain at FDA. We're going to select a panelists that really reflect, certainly in the video pieces and in call starters, the full spectrum of disorder, the full spectrum of experiences, of onset, right? We have an opportunity to show them this is not just a disease of boys and old men, or it's, there are women. So Christy had asked, how are we going to make sure that women's disease is recognized? They have very little understanding or knowledge of women's disease. So this is our opportunity. And believe me, we are going to have this mapped out, at least a framework mapped out, to make sure that we hit all the high points and that all voices, all kind of main types of voices are heard. And then it's up to you, who is willing to show up on the day, who's willing to send in a statement in advance, and trust myself and James Valentine to read it into the record. I also want to make sure for anyone who's a Spanish speaker out there, I apologize that we do not have live translation today, but I want to assure you and promise you that we will have live translation the day of the entire FDA meeting on July 22nd. So just like our last ALD Connect annual meeting, where you could select Spanish audio, that will also be available. And, we encourage people from different languages, if you feel most comfortable sharing your story in a different language, please consider writing it down and sending it in advance so that we can get it accurately translated and make sure, because the meeting does happen in English, but we want to make sure that for all our friends for whom Spanish is their primary language, we want to make sure that you can witness and experience and learn from this meeting in live real time. So I hope that is, and Kathleen, if you could also comment on, there's a, maybe this is just a good example to speak to someone who wasn't diagnosed until they were 18 years, 9 months, wasn't eligible for pediatric trials, fully functional, but did have, was developmentally disabled and ultimately lost his life at age 23. Is this the kind of experience we're looking for? I would say yes. I think anything, we know that, if you're identified as an adult with ALD or AMN, you also had that genetic mutation as a child. And so you may have suffered from pediatric disease, and you may also, unfortunately, have suffered from some adult manifestations of this disorder. And so we want to make sure that all these experiences can be captured. every voice is a needed participant here. I think what we don't want to do, or would not be helpful, is to have people call in about their pediatric experiences. Unfortunately, that's not germane to the topic that we're attempting to address and instruct FDA. So it's not that we don't value pediatric patients. Please know we'll never be accused of that. But we want to make sure that this meeting is focused. We only have, it seems like, oh, we have a whole day. We really only have a very limited time to get our message across. And right now we're using this platform to do adult manifestations. If we're able, we would certainly be willing to have a second meeting with FDA and illustrate further their understanding of pediatric indications. But right now it is adult experiences.
There's a question that came in from Alyssa that I want Larry to answer, because Larry is part of the group that was helping to try to give rare diseases more attention within the FDA. And the question is, does a rare disease like ALD tend to get less attention from the FDA compared to other diseases that impact more people?
And Alyssa, I would say historically that was correct. I think that rare diseases did not get the attention that they needed. But a couple things changed that. You know, in the 1980s, there was something called the Orphan Drug Act that was passed that started to bring attention to, you know, the other name for rare diseases is orphan conditions. So that started to bring attention. And then, you know, eventually we developed the rare diseases program at the FDA, which has grown. And rare diseases have become a very important aspect of the FDA's work. Since I think in the recent years, drug developers are actually, you know, developing more and more treatments and focusing more on rare diseases, and rare disease drug development has become a significant part of the FDA's work. So they're very important to the FDA. There are staff that are devoted to looking at rare diseases and trying to expedite drug development for them. And there's even a movement to create a center of excellence that would be completely focused on rare diseases. That's something that hasn't happened yet, but something that I pushed for when I was at the agency. You know, there's one for cancer, and I would like to see one for rare diseases. So yeah, it is an important area of work for the FDA.
Yeah. That being said, you know, FDA, you know, even with this more of this focus on understanding some of these common areas to help bring rare disease drug development, you know, make it a little bit easier across the board, you know, every single, you know, area where drugs are being developed, you want to have the trials be designed, you know, in a way that's really tailored to the particular disease. And so we, you know, FDA, they can't possibly, you know, every single rare disease that's out there. And even if they do their due diligence and try to read up on the medical literature for a disease, you know, in rare diseases like ALD, it's going to be limited in what they can learn from textbooks and literature. You know, even if there are articles, it's not going to go into the detail that you all will be able to provide in terms of really painting that picture of what daily life looks like. And it certainly doesn't cover what you all view as most important. And so, you know, this, even with a more focus at the FDA on rare diseases, you know, we want to make sure that FDA really understands ALD, you know, in the different forms. And then that way they can give, instead of maybe borrowing what they know from other diseases, which is kind of human instinct, you know, they'll now be armed with the information to make really, you know, kind of, you know, fit for purpose type input on trial designs and evaluating, you know, risks, what your, you know, the risk tolerance that this community has, you know, give the right weight to those things that are important treatment benefits to you all. You know, so that's why it's extra important in a rare disease, because it's less likely that they already have that knowledge. And even if they try to seek it from traditional means, again, like the medical literature, they're not likely to find as much information there. There's another question I think that's somewhat related, which is asking, you know, at this meeting, can we press FDA to scale the approval process for the rarity of the disease? For instance, less options for patients will have a faster approval or less stringent process. So what I would say is for this meeting, we're not asking you all to take positions on particular regulatory programs or processes. Instead, what Larry and I can tell you is that we know that there are tools in FDA's toolbox that are useful for speeding drugs to the market for rare diseases or allowing more flexibility. And the things that help kind of activate those different administrative tools are really understanding just how serious a condition is and how debilitating it is in daily life, understanding just how great the unmet medical need is. A lot of the times, there can be misconceptions about how well controlled certain symptoms are, based off of off-label treatments and what have you. And so really helping FDA understand those things rather than just saying, oh, we want drugs faster. If you really explain what patients' needs are and how serious they are, that triggers FDA to say, oh, wow, we really want to get drugs to these patients faster. And then they'll start using those programs more for ALD. Another question I'll read for Kathleen. For another, am I within the scope of this meeting type question? With her son was transplanted as a child, but is now an adult, and his issues are related to cerebral impact. As his caregiver, is she the kind of person that we're looking to hear from at this meeting?
I would say it's probably, I know that she also goes on to say that she has her own symptoms. I mean, certainly, the aftermath of cerebral impact is important for FDA to understand. And I think, just as there are caregivers that are part of our community who have adult children who went through that process, I think you also have an experience. The fact that your son was younger when he was transplanted, he is now an adult and suffers, ramifications from our disorder. With respect to your own disease, I know that not everyone is lucky enough to live very close to a recognized kind of ALD superhero expert doctor. What I would recommend to everyone is that if you have questions about the symptoms you're going through, if you can't, and especially I think female patients go through this because for a long time we've been told we're just carriers. Not true. And it's hard to discern what is ALD and what is other. I would encourage folks to, go to the resources that exist in the ALD Connect community. There have been presentations and recorded webinars from annual meetings and just standalone over the years that we have inserted, and you can find them on both our YouTube channel and our website just by looking into Women with ALD, and then you can find or you can go through the agenda from a previous annual meeting. You can educate yourself on what the experts are telling us and reminding us are the symptoms. I also urge people to consider our other support programs. We have monthly support calls. You can, if you want to sit among a group of your peers who are experts in their own experience, that's a great place to help discern what is ALD or AMN and what is other. So I would recommend to everyone, really, we're so glad that you're going to be part of this process, and I hope you do fill out that survey and step forward, raise your hand in advance to let us know you're willing to be kind of a more forward-facing participant. But you can make that decision anytime up till 3 o'clock on July 22nd. But I also encourage people to get back into the resources that exist all the time at ALD Connect. And if we can't answer your questions through there, reach out to us again through my email, through the info@aldconnect.org, through admin at aldconnect.org. Allow us to help navigate you towards the resources that exist so we can answer some of these questions in advance. Because we want to make sure that we're, I think you don't need to doubt yourself as much. I'm willing to wager that what you're experiencing actually is, trust your instincts, it is ALD.
Well, with that, I think we've answered all of the questions that are pertaining to this meeting from everybody. So I want to thank all of you in the audience who have stuck with us and for so many of you that provided great questions for us to address. I'll echo what Kathleen said. Please fill out that survey. It's not just for those who do want to raise their hand and kind of nominate themselves to maybe be one of those speakers, but also just for us to gather information about all of you that might be participating live in the meeting in advance of the day. And again, if you fill out that survey, then that's kind of your way to make sure you'll get notified when the registration opens up as well. I think that's all Larry and I had. Kathleen, anything else before we close?
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. Thank you, James and Larry, for taking time today. Thank you to the other ALD Connect folks behind the scenes that are running, chatting, and keeping this going. This will be recorded and it will be available in all the places that all the ALD Connect recordings are available. So come back to this with questions and for resources. And I know sometimes I have heard James and Larry explain this entire PFDD process multiple times, and every time it lands differently. And I really kind of I understand something better. So I'm grateful for this resource. I apologize to anyone if we didn't get to all your questions. We only have an hour together, but thank you so much for your willingness to participate, and let's stand up and be heard and rewrite the book on ALD.
Yes. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.